Here we are once again. Today's guest is Joff Whitten from the Children's Centre. Joff, how are you?
I'm really good, actually. I'm really good.
Things are keeping going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
That's really good to hear. So, just to start the episode off, I thought, explain to people a little bit about the Children's Centre.
Sure.
What you guys do, how you guys do it, and the sort of methods and maybe procedures that you guys, do it in.
I'm going to ask a question before I start answering your question.
Okay.
Because how many people do you think listen to this who aren't from the Isle of Man?
I would say there's a few people from further afield. We average about, at the moment, 300 listeners on YouTube, 300 listeners Spotify, maybe more. It could go to 600, give or take. We're starting up with small, but I'd say there is maybe Manx people who listen further afield.
Yeah, sure. Because people have an interest in the Isle of Man and already sort of know enough about the Isle of Man.
Yeah, and they see it as a niche itself.
Indeed,
I think.
yeah.
People sometimes make the mistake of trying to pick out little parts of the Isle of Man as a niche, whereas me and myself and Herb have actually worked out that the Isle of Man is too small to be able to just do one subject. So we need to reach out and branch out to different type of thing and use the whole of the Isle of Man as a niche, I think.
Yeah, exactly. The reason I asked that question because I'm going to talk specifically around the Isle of Man and the context of the Isle of Man.
Okay.
Sort of make an assumption that people who are listening know enough that they kind of understand the Isle of Man's not part of the UK and they understand that the kind of Isle of Man's different kind of laws and legislation and approaches than some other places. You know, people sometimes get that as a confusion and make mistakes.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so the Children's Centre. Children's Centre is. I am so proud of my job at the Children's Centre. It really gives me a boost every day knowing what I get to do at work. I'm so lucky with it, and there are very few people I think in the world who can kind of really honestly and sincerely say that. They get it with a bit of a zing in their step and kind of go, "I'm going to work today," So I'll talk broadly and generally about what we are as a charity, and then I guess if you're interested, I'll talk a little bit about my role and where my role fits into it. So Children's Centre is a name that quite a few people on the Isle of Man will have heard of because it's an old charity, just a little bit older than 150 years.
Oof.
So it was almost one of the first charities on Ireland that was established.
Okay.
And therefore has been connected to childcare, child services, across a good block of contemporary history.
Yeah.
So, predates things like the NHS, so predates things like schools as well in a way. And therefore has been through a number of different types and services. Most people have a bit of a familiarity of it in the 20th century. So,
I would agree.
20th century was... for a time was involved in kind of residential care for children and children who had complex families, and we don't need to go into the stories of it. But the reasons why families are in a difficult place or parents are in a difficult place. So residential care was a block of the 20th century. More recently, post 21st century is probably the version that more people are familiar with, and that is a charity that helps children, families, young people who have complications either because of their health or their well-being, complications within the family home, so parental complications or dynamics there.
Yeah.
And as a result are struggling. So either struggling with like social care issues or struggling with healthcare issues or struggling with personal sort of
struggle is sort of the main priority in a sense.
Absolutely. And the charity helps families who are in that space.
Yeah.
So I'm going to use some jargon. And the more recent version is to do with what's called adverse childhood experiences.
Okay.
So they are various different kind of criteria that you look at to assess whether family's doing well or not. And if there's one of these adverse experiences, that family is likely statistically to kind of have a bit more of a difficulty than other families. And a charity like the Children's Centre, that's where we help.
Right.
So, again, more recent history, we were doing contracts for the government. We were doing a couple of different service delivery, including things like fostering and residential care. They went to another service provider because that's what happens. There are different.
Yeah.
I
suppose that's industry in a sense, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's
charitable business.
Indeed, they are businesses. So for the government asks, we need to solve this problem, and then a couple of different organisations say, oh, I can solve it this way, or I can solve it that way, and I can solve it that way. And so they picked a different organisation from the Children's Centre, and that was around 2016. And as a result, the charity changed shape, size, and scale quite quickly, and quite a few people on Ireland had a perception that we'd shut, because we used to have an office on Woodburn Road, and there was a centre on Woodburn Road, and it was quite, high profile. People would drive past it and and see stuff going on. And when that stopped, quite a few people thought, the charity had to, close its doors.
Interesting.
During that period of time, we had started a project up at a farm just outside of Douglas on the old Castletown Road. It was called, at the time, it was called the Community Farm, and it was a model of kind of like engaging people of all sorts of different backgrounds, maybe possibly adults as well with learning complications, so therefore I'm talking about disabilities, that kind of thing. And it's an amazing space. So that project was going on, while all these other things were happening around about 2016.
Yeah.
And then when all the contracts weren't renewed, the organisation took the decision to relocate to the farm, because it's an amazing space to work.
Yeah.
My involvement with the organisation, I joined in 2019. And
so after the rebuild.
After the rebuild, yeah. And I all I saw, when I connected with basically applied for the job, is a farm outside of Douglas, running a children's charity. And to me, it was like, God, that's great. That's
as an outside perspective sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. What a great opportunity. What an amazing kind of location. What an amazing space. And at the time, because it had been doing lots of different things, and then as things kind of shut down in size and scale, it became quite pure. Quite pure in the sense of it was just a charity. It wasn't doing things like nurseries or other kind of family support services and things. It was just doing charitable work, so just working with children who have these difficulties in their life. So for me, from the outside, it looked quite simple. It was just like this sort of like
looked simple.
Yeah. There's an operative word there, isn't there? Exactly, it looked quite simple. It looked quite simplistic, pure, if that's the right way of phrasing it.
Yeah, I think that's relevant.
And I think the team at the time, that was their ambition and intention as well, and also the board as well.
So when you came in, then, how did it sort of feel? Or is the team still the same now, majoritively, or is it here or there?
Here or there. I mean, as normal for organisations, some people moved on,
chop and change.
Absolutely, yeah.
But did you feel certainly welcome when you first joined?
That's a really interesting question, and I'm going to have to speak openly about my colleagues, and perhaps they won't like me to do this, but a team of people who care and are passionate about the work they do, and really, they turn up for work wanting to do the best they possibly can, had been in an organisation that had been through a great uncertainty, and actually quite a few people. I think it was about 110 employees in sort of 2016. To drop down to around about when I joined, which was 16 employees. So it's dropped its huge size and scale. So people felt very vulnerable in their jobs.
Yes.
Very nervous about the future.
That must have been a bit of an unstable environment to go into.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, there's arguably it was kind of a bit of a risk kind of taking on a job like that, because when I talk about being a pure charity, the only income was donations from the public.
Yep.
And they're only as secure as your reputation,
Yeah.
and if people start thinking that something's shut or gone or disappeared, they're going to stop giving to it as well. So there was a strong risk there as well.
Definitely.
But I'm supposed to be talking about the charity, but I'm talking about my background ever so slightly. But
that's okay.
My background, I come from long-winded, but I sort of started doing sort of creative things, so arts and music, and then I taught at a college, and then I worked at various different art galleries and museums, and then
you've been around,
but always at the periphery, always at the edge of education. So particularly like art gallery stuff, you work with lots of sort of like kids who kind of struggle to kind of like fit into sort of normal school systems, that kind of thing.
What is normal these days?
Yeah,
Joff?
no, exactly. I mean, that's a jolly good question.
I mean, we could talk about that one for hours on end. I think, couldn't you?
I've got lots of strong opinions on that one as well, because it's a. We'll come back to it, because it's
will.
a really important.
Yes,
it's a really important point.
So you were doing music. You were on the outskirts of
outside of education. So I wasn't a teacher in a school, but I had got a teaching qualification. But I had worked alongside education is the language of it. So I kind of understood these places that could work in a way weren't clearly obviously hospital or clearly obviously school, but were really beneficial to the kids that bounce between those sorts of places. So when I came with my UK eyes, and it was UK eyes, to kind of see the farm and see the team and talking to my incredible colleagues who were so passionate about what they did or had done, but were slightly worried about the future, you know. And again, I thought about it looked simple. It's like, well, this is dead obvious, you know. This is where we fit. We fit in the landscape just here, just beautifully in between health, education, and social care. And you know, we'll pick up these children who don't quite fit in, and create a space for them to fit, and a space for them to feel secure.
Like a nurturing area, sort of thing.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly, absolutely.
An area to nurture those into, maybe to help them into a certain space or a certain route.
Yep. And sometimes, absolutely, and sometimes that work is patience, you know, because it's just time and patience.
Yeah,
so
and
it's
patience isn't a lot. I mean, not many people have patience these days, Joff, which must make it tricky in some ways.
Absolutely, and I think organisationally, many places don't have patience. So healthcare has no patience whatsoever, and that's not a joke, but it's but it's like. You know, you have your 6 sessions of knee therapy because you've done your knee in, and then you're gone. And it's like, well, what if my knee still hurts? Sorry, you've had your 6. Off you go.
Yes.
You know, and to extrapolate that joke to kind of mental health care, for example, you have your 6 counselling sessions, and then you're done.
Yeah.
You know, or you have your very short course of medication if medication is right for you, and then you're done. And sometimes that has no impact at all. You know, it's about a longer term piece of thinking and a longer term piece of work.
Right.
So, you know, one of the things that I'm so proud of in the organisation is that we only stop working with a family when the work is complete. So it's not time limited. And if they need us for a year, that's how long we will work with them for.
So that means then the charity might support people for numerous years?
Yes. Yeah.
And is it something you take pure enjoyment out of working and seeing these families or children or parents maybe, or I mean just adults in general, develop and go through the process of that change into trying to find their little group?
That's a really interesting question, because my job, I do very little in terms of like face-to-face work with the kids, with the families and the teenagers. So I just hear the stories. I don't kind of see them myself. But yeah, it's an incredibly rewarding process. You know, when you see the outputs and the outcomes of these people that the team have worked with. You know, it's their hard work, it's their skills, it's their passion that have made the difference. Yeah. But so I sit slightly behind that, but it is incredibly rewarding.
100%.
And we get these incredible, you know, emotive letters from people who kind of say, we just didn't know who else would have helped us or what else we could have possibly done. And, you know, we're the only people who gave them any support or you know, intervention.
That is so good to hear, though, from no matter what position in the charity you're in. If someone's praising your work, well, you're doing the right thing, aren't you, really?
Yeah, absolutely.
So a little bit more into the farm then, and the actual farm itself.
Yeah, sure.
How has that developed over the years since you joined?
Well, again,
where obviously it's shrank down, became a lot more defined in one spot rather than sort of dispersed out. It's concentrated on that farm. Yeah?
Absolutely, yeah.
So talk to me through how it's developed since you joined and where you guys are at now, really, people listening know what is the Children's Centre now.
And I'm going to get quite excited about this. And this, again, is some of my my previous work experience and background in regards to, you know, what I call cultural organisations. So, you know, things like museums and art galleries or heritage sites and so forth. So you say the farm out loud, and we quite often work with, let's say, a business in Douglas who've got some volunteers and they want to come up to the farm and they expect to see pigs and sheep and some fields with some stuff growing in it. Okay. And maybe a tool shed, you know, because that's what your mental picture is when you say a farm, you know. And especially when it was previously the project called the Community Farm, you know, that's essentially what was sort of going on there. In a way, we prefer to call it the Children's Centre because
the Children's Centre,
the address is Walbury Farm, but the service is the Children's Centre because we have got an incredible range of experiences and possibilities there. And I'm going to start, and I hate to list them, but no, I don't hate to list them. I love listing them, but I hate to bore you by listing.
No, you won't bore me.
So, for example, we have mountain bikes, and we have mountain boards, and we have, you know, climbing equipment. We also have wetsuits and sit-on-top kayaks, and, you know, ways of getting kids into the sea. We have cooking facilities, and we have kitchen spaces and social eating spaces. We've got an art room, and we've got a pottery, and we've got a metal workshop, and we've got a wood workshop. We've got a whole collection of animals, like I've said. You know, there are a couple of three pigs, and donkeys, and a goat, and some sheep, and some guinea pigs, and some chickens, and some runner ducks. And we've got some growing spaces, and some of them are growing produce to eat, but some of it's about kind of mindfulness and flowers and pollinators. And we've got bees, so we're making honey.
Wow.
And then we have got a tech room where you can do 3D printing or, you know,
That's
gaming.
crazy.
And then we've got a family contact centre, so we can help families who are really struggling for parents to be in the same space together through legal reasons and complications, but the child or children has a right to see the non-resident parent in a safe and lovely environment.
Definitely.
So we've got one of those, and then we've got a hobbit house, and we've got a Celtic roundhouse, and we've got a boardwalk across a wild space that's kind of a bit of a bog, and it's really, you know, evocative for the imagination.
You've got everything.
We've got loads, and it's so cool. And the idea is that any child who comes to us, we should have every possible stimulus available there.
Definitely.
So we can take them off site. We can take them to the sea or the plantations or to Ramsey, or, you know, go and pick them up in Derby or something like that. There's no problem with that. But, you know, if you come to the centre, there's so many exciting things that you can do there.
100%.
And there's a logic to that, and there's a reason to it. You know, quite a lot of the kids that we work with have either got an ADHD diagnosis or maybe showing ADHD-like tendencies, and therefore, if you know anything about that, but that's kind of like you just people jump around and think of new things and just go over there and do something else, and so
Look, see,
absolutely
touch, feel,
and get stimulated by that suddenly. Oh, what's that? You know, and so we've created it of being, you know, flexible and multi-purpose, because the kids we work with are flexible and multi-purpose. Yeah,
you know, you speak about stimulating in the sense, what does that do for those troubled children? Does it help them forget about what's going on for a brief period? Or
that's absolutely it as well.
Is that the aim?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I mean, you know, we are a nurtury therapy styley sort of organisation. So we are, you know, we're not trying to put the real complicated problem that child has in their face right in front of them. You're right. You know, you've got a couple of hours of thinking about something else, of doing something else. Of, you know, you can address their problems, and you can bring them up, and you can use, you know, therapeutic interventions to help them with their problems. But some of it is also about respite. You know, it's about finding joy in life, about finding you know, and joy in learning. There's a huge thing of like because there is a complication in schools, but if you don't have happy learners, you're not going to learn anything, you know.
Yeah, if you don't want to, if you're not interested in the thing that you're learning about, you're not going to want to learn it.
No, absolutely, yeah. And it's just it's such an obvious, as it were, statement, and you know, everyone understands it when you say it out loud, because like, yeah, of course that's true. But so that's some of what we're trying to do, is achieve happy children.
Yes,
you know, and quite often they're children who are unhappy for a collection of reasons, you know.
I mean, from my visit up there, Joff, well, myself and Herb's visit up there, it was, yeah, I didn't really, like you say, I hadn't been exposed to what was going on up there, and I still remember you talking about that games room and a 3D printing room, and I couldn't get my head around how that helped and how that was sort of needed, and then you explained to me that actually bringing those children, saying to them, oh, if they're stuck in a room and won't come out their house because they are, I don't know, maybe enjoy gaming a bit too much, maybe addicted, or that's struggling with their mental health, you draw them to the children's centre by saying, we've got this, we've got that, and then by then you might say, oh, can you just come and help us feed the pigs?
Absolutely.
Like that. And I did remember that, and I thought, I need to ask you, is that sort of technique popularly used by you guys, do you think?
Is it used? I mean, we use it an awful lot. I'm not sure.
Like, is it a real problem? I mean, young children who can't get out the house and can't sort of, maybe they love their games too much. Do you guys, is that like a really popular sort of with children these days?
Like, computer game addiction is an interesting question. I wouldn't say that statistically we work with many children currently who have a real computer game addiction. What we have is an awful lot of dysregulated children, so they don't have you know, sensible bedtimes, and they can game till 2-3 in the morning. You know, and you know, as a 12-year-old, that's not healthy. So they have a very dysregulated home life where sleep is so important, particularly for growing young people.
100%.
And it's important for everybody. But so the dysregulation is the issue there. It's not necessarily the computer addiction. It's the chaotic life. It's the chaotic unstructured life.
Unstructured. That's a real good word. Is that sort of that's really big?
Yeah, it's really problematic. Yeah, and probably arguably the majority of the clients that we currently work with, they have a problem with unstructured. Yeah, so you might talk about that medically. So there's this thing of ADHD quite often has a similar associated condition called ODD, which is oppositional defiance disorder.
Okay.
And so it's we all have a tiny twinge of it, but the classic teenager going, "No, I'm not doing that," but to a medical extent.
Okay.
So
but where does that medical line stop, Josh?
That's an interesting question, and I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer it. But I'm fascinated at the moment of the way we're trying to medicalise every problem.
That's what I was just going to lead you on to there.
Yeah,
how do you think that it's almost becoming bigger than the actual problem itself?
Absolutely. And what I find bizarre and slightly concerning is and I'm talking about ADHD a lot, but people kind of go, my child has ADHD, they need medication. And the answer to that is no, they don't need medication. There are some where medication is really beneficial to, but it's not one of those sorts of things where medication is the only answer. And actually, it's quite a disruptive medication. So
100%.
So it's not necessarily the right thing to do for every
damage more than just help.
And also, ADHD is not an on-off switch, as in like I have it or I don't have it.
Okay.
So I have it, so I have to have medication, or I don't have it, so I don't have medication.
Okay.
These are language of continuums.
Yeah.
And actually, lots more people probably have it than you might be kind of prepared to accept.
Definitely. But where's this sort of labelling come from?
I think it's understanding. I think, because again, that's an interesting one. Sometimes back in my day, we never used to have it. The answer to it is like, yes, we did. It's just that you weren't aware of it. You didn't notice it. Slightly personal story. But my uncle, my dad's brother, passed away recently.
Yeah.
And we were at a family funeral. And those things are always very emotive. But his uncle was a prisoner of war in World War II, and had written an account, a booklet based upon his experiences of being a prisoner of war. And me and my brothers, one of my younger brother Nick, found this booklet, and we were reading it and talking about it, and it was so fascinating to kind of engage with, because it's one of those sort of like family history things. To read his own words about it, the story, but to read his own words about it's really, really remarkable. And there were twinges of it in terms of because I think the force is strong in my family. There's quite a bit of neurodivergence going on and around, and to read about Uncle Ken's account of experiences, and it's kind of going, yep, see that, there we go, and it's so if he lived now, would have probably had a diagnosis of some shape or form, but didn't in the time that he lived in, because of the nature of how people were. So sorry, it's a bit of a waffly story.
No, it's fine.
But it's my point is essentially that I think we are a lot more aware of these conditions now. So it's not that more kids necessarily have them, it's just that we're more aware of them.
Right.
However, the way that we're dealing with them to support them, I think that needs to be fundamentally addressed.
I would agree.
Because I heard a brilliant statistic: 20% of dogs have ADHD. Which I think is so good. I think it's so funny when you hear that, because you can kind of go, oh yeah, I recognise that.
You wouldn't want to know what it was of humans, though, would you?
Well, it's about the same.
Really?
Yeah, it's about the same, and that's the thing. It's a mammalian. It's a lot of mammals have these sorts of things.
Yeah, hyperactivity.
Not hyperactivity necessarily in terms of like hyper energy, but hyperactivity is in hyper focus, hyper brain processing.
Brains don't turn off, sort of thing.
Yes, exactly. So if around about 20% of people have some form of neurodivergence, I don't think divergence is quite the right word for it, because it's just part of who we are.
You can use that to your own strength, can't you?
Oh, good. Yeah.
Absolutely. People, rather than seeing it as a negative, having, I don't know, maybe ADHD or autism or something along that sort of line, why are people not sort of bigging up? Like, hang on, you can use that as a superpower. It's sort of in the talk at the moment that maybe there needs to be a switch from talking negatively about these type of
Yes.
things to actually saying,
So many. So again, medically, they talk about it as a deficit-based
Yeah.
presentation. So what can't they do, rather than a positive? What can they do?
exactly,
And I think that's the way to shift it. You know,
100%.
there's Isaac Newton. It's kind of worth reading about Isaac Newton. So famous. Obviously,
Very.
changed science. But some of the accounts around him, like turning up without his trousers on, and he was given the wrong food at breakfast, which he expected to be dinner, so he went straight to bed straight after it.
Yeah.
And then people saying, "But no, I've had my apple pie," or something like that.
Yes.
So quite a quirky,
Eccentric gentleman.
personality. But then you kind of look at it with contemporary eyes and go, clearly on the spectrum there.
Yes, wayward.
Incredible mind, and
Incredible.
incredible achievements, but clearly very spectrumy as well.
Yes, but if you allow someone,
do you know what exactly? And if you find their
correct
joy and
environment
you
too.
find their skill and find their way of being positive, then everybody can contribute, and I think that gets really exciting.
that actually excites me thinking about it, because the help and work that charities are doing all over the world, this switch is coming, I think.
Yeah.
There's a real, now that we're starting to recognise more people and recognising it in more people can start then studying it more, and then now the switch comes to actually you guys can do more than the normal person.
Absolutely. I started my, not really career, but I started. I quite enjoy music. I've had a lot of times in my life where music's been really important to me. I play various instruments, but so many people who are musical, their brains are wacky.
Yes,
they are
wired different.
wired differently. Yeah, absolutely.
How do you think that gives you an advantage
as a musician or as a
person? How does that? What different wiring of being able to play different music and sort of feel the? Is it feeling the music? Is that the right way to explain it? I don't play an instrument myself.
It's a big question, this one, and again, I've got lots of opinions on this.
No, that's okay.
So my approach to music is I am quite feeling based.
Okay.
So I if it doesn't emotionally capture me, I'm not really invested into it. But it's also it can be a very technical subject as well. It's a very precise art form. There are those who really, really analyse and study and go into it in a way that's really, intellectual. So I think a couple of different brains can kind of come out of that.
Yeah.
Positively,
Do you think people can talk in music? Do you think it's a form of communication in a sense? When you're in a band,
for sure, yeah.
When you're in a band and there's different people playing different types of instruments, can you guys connect with each other in a different way than vocal?
Oh, absolutely. And I can play really lovely music with some people, and then I can't with other people. And
really,
it's quite undefinable how it works.
It's like a different language almost.
Yeah,
of
and
music.
there's definitely a feel thing about it. And there are some who you just kind of go, "Oh, it's really good what you're playing," and it's not that they're better; it just feels right.
Okay.
And
that's interesting.
Yeah,
I'd like to dive into a little bit more about that. Actually, what about it makes it feel different?
Ooh, I don't know. And I'm going to use the word vibe.
Vibe.
I think it just gets for me when it just things happen at the time that I want them to happen, and they go bigger at the time when I want them to go bigger, and they go smaller when I want them to go smaller. And it's a vibe thing, and it's just very exciting, and it's really intuitive, and it's really non-vocal. You're not sort of looking at sort of saying to each other, right, we now need to play differently. But it just sort of happens, and
interesting.
And it's fascinating because I've been lucky enough that I've played with some phenomenal players, but I just can't play brilliantly with them. It just doesn't click. It just doesn't work.
That sort of snappiness and sort of togetherness in a sense.
And then I've played with some other people who aren't, and I don't mean it disrespectfully, but aren't like the best players in the world, but it's been so good.
Yes,
it sounds,
enjoyed it.
Yeah, exactly, and it's worked so wonderfully.
So it's something that you've done for years and years, music? You started from a young age?
Yeah, very much so, yeah. I mean, I took to music quite young, so I was sort of playing guitar in bands when I was sort of 15, 16 already, and then I took it quite seriously in my early 20s, and then went to university in my mid-20s because I actually sort of didn't have a brilliant ending to my A-levels. I sort of dropped out of my A-levels, and I wasn't really fitting into school terribly well. Actually, so interesting. I sometimes tell that story in terms of my job because the work I do now, I sort of went through it, because I was reasonably bright as a kid, but I dropped out of A-levels and I fell out really badly with my mum and dad because they expected me to go down a sort of a career path, and I went and lived in this weird house where it wasn't exactly healthy, you know. And then I didn't go to university until I was mid-20s.
Right.
and I did really well when I went to university in my mid-20s.
You just weren't ready.
I just wasn't ready. I was too young. I was very immature.
Some people need time to develop, don't
Absolutely.
they? Everyone moves at different speeds.
At different paces, yeah. And it really helps me now when I work with some of the teenagers that we work with, and they kind of get worried. It's like, oh, I'm going to drop out my GCSEs. And it's like, don't, but also don't worry if you do.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world. You know, there's always time to reconnect with learning, and there's always time
100%.
to kind of like change what you are and grow as a human being. You know,
And don't try and keep up, eh?
don't worry what next door neighbour's doing. Absolutely. Find your own space, you know, find your own rhythm. And once you find that, then I think that helps make healthy people and successful people and so forth.
Definitely.
You
And
know.
a lot of that comes from social media. I think
Yeah.
you guys will see it firsthand of how people are online a lot more and seeing other people's lives and how wonderful they look over a camera and
Yep.
through a phone.
Yep.
And then they wonder why they're not doing the same things at the same time. At 19, why am I not at uni? Or at 23, why have I not got a full-time job? And realistically,
It's so, you know, I mean, we all want security, we all want safety, and we all want connection. And, you know, when those things aren't there, it's very hard for people.
scary too.
It's scary, exactly. But there's also a version of kind of going, well, is this enough? You know, am I okay? Is this all right now? And I think there are loads of problems with social media, but it can present this idea of like, I need more to be happy, and I need everything to be happy. And I think a lot of it is unfortunately telling like porkies, isn't it?
Yes.
You know?
Oh, yeah.
And there's some classic little kind of like examples of it. You know, you see the frame of someone looking so happy on holiday, and then sort of you pull slightly further back, and you see that it's just in this awful place, you know, and it's actually freezing cold.
Bomb site.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's true. You know, there's so many people are presenting a tiny little element of their life to say how happy they are and how wonderful they are. And the actual reality of it is it's quite difficult around them, you know.
100%.
Yeah.
And has music, how has that helped you throughout your career leading to where you are now?
Yeah.
Has it taught you any skills? Has it taught you anything about you leading to the job of
Do you know, that's
the Children's Centre?
Because I'm the CEO of the Children's Centre, so my job is to try and, you know, do the best I can, but to run the organisation. But actually, I use an awful lot of musical thinking in regards to my work. So some of it from managing of people. You know, one of the big parts of my job is around, you know, trying to get the best out of the team.
Definitely.
And how do you do that? Well, you find places for them where they really fit, where they're really confident, and they, you know, it doesn't feel like work. They're just doing the best job that they possibly can.
Yeah.
But within that, communication is incredibly important, because if you're not telling everybody else what you're doing, then it all falls apart. And actually, you know, talking about the vibe within music, but there's there's a bit of that. You know, some people need to speak to each other to communicate, and some people need to act together to communicate. And I don't mean act as in being a play.
Elaborate a little bit.
So, you know, the way. Oh God, this is long-winded thinking.
No, don't worry about it at all.
What I mean is, so it's all very well if I say yes, I'll be there at 9 o'clock, but turning up at 9 o'clock is the important thing. So the verbal is I'll turn up at 9 o'clock. The acting is being there at 9 o'clock and being ready.
Yeah.
Now, some people really like punctuality, and some people punctuality isn't really that important to them. So, you know, communication isn't just always about the words you say; it's the way you operate as a person. And I think, and I'll relate that slightly to bands, because within a band, you know, you've got your fairly defined roles, and there's an awful lot of like expectation about what those roles should do, and there's actually a bit of trust as well, you know, that you should always do the thing that you're supposed to in that precise moment.
Yes.
And I'll give a really key example of when it goes really badly wrong, and it's to do with there's a band called, well, everyone's heard of the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yes,
they're relatively well known.
Too right, they are huge.
Their guitar player, who has been in the band a couple of times, who's fascinating. He's a guy called John Frusciante. And he joined in about 1988, 9, something like that. And he recorded their sort of major big breakout album, which was called Blood Sugar Sex Magic.
Okay.
He then fell really badly into drugs and had a terrible drug problem. And he went into this kind of quiet quitting kind of thing, where he wasn't turning up for the band. And there's a very famous live performance where he chose to play his part wrong. And it's fascinating to watch, because the rest of the band are just sort of like, what are you doing? And he's purposefully breaking it. You know, he's
Really?
purposefully,
Disrupted everybody.
disrupting everybody, but not in a way that was cool or fun
Mhm.
or anarchic or punk. It was just odd. And it's such a fascinating thing to kind of watch and kind of think about in terms of group dynamics, because it's sort of, it's the word about trust. You know, it's sort of you expect people to do the thing that they're supposed to do, and then when someone doesn't, it's like, what are you doing? You know,
Yes.
it's
Why are
amazing.
you doing that?
Why are you doing that? Yeah.
Do you ever get that when you deal, like, obviously maybe not with in the children's centre, maybe within the children's centre, but when you're running people,
Yeah.
do you find if there is somebody who maybe isn't gelling the same, it can
Yes.
cause that with inside work as well as music?
Oh, for sure, absolutely. And this is kind of to some extent, some of my because I've done some leadership training, I've done some leadership courses, and I try and do some professional development every year around this kind of topic.
Oh yeah.
You know, it's really important to learn and grow myself as well. But I use an awful lot of that sort of observation of how band dynamic works as a way of kind of applying to people.
That's cool.
But yeah, absolutely. And what I find kind of fascinating is quite often I'm a bit sort of I sit in the middle of things. You know, I kind of quite often see many different viewpoints.
Open-minded.
Yeah, hopefully, I try to be. But then occasionally there are situations where I can see the person on that side doing something and it sort of makes sense, and then the person on that side doing something and it sort of makes sense, but they are so cross with each other. But then it's kind of gone through this whole, as it were, lots of different lines to kind of get through. So I've got to be aware of that sometimes.
How do you bring them together?
How do you bring them together? Yeah, exactly. How do you make that person see that person's perspective? Maybe not that, but maybe they can see my perspective and I can see that. You know what I mean? You know, sometimes the role is about acting as a mediator
and a leader.
Well, for sure. And actually sometimes that's about modeling good behavior. You know, it's about showing, well, okay, this is difficult. I know you're both frustrated, but the thing to do here is to be a grown-up, is to sort of,
Yes. Do you explain that to children?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't, because like I say, my role, I don't
would
really
you
work
encourage
directly.
people to explain that sort of,
I think
trying to explain to children who maybe struggle to get along with people?
Actually, yeah, we do, because an example of that is sometimes teenagers think that teachers hate them, and they and it's like the answer is, well, no, they don't. They're just sort of doing their job, and sometimes they're just doing their job based upon how that works, and they're just trying to do the best that they possibly can. So they don't hate you because you said some rude word in the class. The reason they have to treat you that way, or maybe tell you that's not appropriate, is because you can't use rude words in the class, and it's a rule. Yeah, it's a rule, and it's a rule for a reason, and it's actually probably quite a good reason, And so explaining that is something that we quite often do. So explaining the context of situations, because we all know this. When you're in a bad place and the world feels it's like it's on top of you, you can feel like everyone's against you.
Yes.
Everyone's against me, and it's actually that it's not really. It's just that
you
yeah,
need
exactly.
to maybe make a little bit of a change. Hey, nothing changes if nothing changes.
Absolutely that. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think I'm a big believer in that. But I'd like to swing the conversation now a bit more towards what the Children's Centre has got coming up.
Sure.
And how you guys sort of communicate with the Isle of Man.
Yeah, and that's a jolly good question, and that's an interesting, complex answer as well.
Cool, we've got time.
When I started, as I said, I joined an organisation that was just so full of brilliant people and so full of opportunity and such an amazing location. And I wasn't an expert because I'd just moved to the island, but I could see there was a gap in between schools and a gap in between healthcare that, for an organisation like the Children's Centre to sit and fit. But at the time, we didn't have an enormous amount of income. So there's only so much you can kind of do, and you can't go above your income level because that's risky and dangerous for a charity to do.
Definitely.
So we had that real complication of being full. There was only so many kids that we could work with, and we were working with that number of kids. And so advertising what we were doing was such a difficult kind of thing to think through, because if we advertise too loudly, too broadly, and then get inundated by, because we've said it before in the conversation, there are so many families currently with people struggling. If we open our doors too loudly and too widely too quickly and have everybody on the island making referrals to us, we run the risk of letting them down, of not being able to help them in that precise moment, or not being able to give them the depth of service that is the most important part of the way that we work. So initially we didn't do an enormous amount of kind of noisy social media about what we were doing. Also, we were building a few spaces as well. So I think when you came up, you saw the long barn in terms of the converted barn that we use as our sort of flexible
wonderful
room.
area.
It's so cool. But we're doing a bit of work on the farm, and we also converted it to solar. We got a grant to change the heating system at the farm, so it's all solar generation. There's a Tesla Powerwall battery with some air source heat pumps to kind of heat the farm. So we were doing some building work. So it's a version of kind of like we won't necessarily loudly broadcast what we've done until we're sort of ready. Yes, exactly. Then unfortunately COVID happened, and COVID slowed quite a lot of things down, and caused problems for almost everybody. We were to some extent relatively lucky on the Isle of Man in terms of how we had lockdowns.
Definitely.
But I think the impact has been further reaching than perhaps we fully understand yet. There's still some kids who really struggle because of those weird times that happened.
He's a prime example. He was at school when year 7, was it year 7, Herb? Year 6 and 7.
6. So 6 is a classic. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, right. So it's that transition from one space to the next.
Correct.
It's been so disrupted, and
many people in here have struggled with that, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
we as a charity struggled during that time as well. So since then, though, we've become a lot more stable and a lot more able to articulate what it is that what we do at the Children's Centre, and our relationships with healthcare and our relationships with education and our relationships with social care are growing and building and becoming much more exciting partnerships.
Definitely.
What
what things have you got coming up? What excuse me, what sort of techniques does the Children's Centre use to try and bring in this income to be allowed to help these people of the Isle of Man, trying to bring it a bit more Isle of Man sort of into the relationship you guys have and how you guys can work on that sort of thing?
Well, one of the really exciting ones that we are going to get going on this year is, because the farm's ace, but at the weekend there's an opportunity for people to come and have a play at the farm. Under just every family, if they wanted to. So we're looking at doing it on one of the days over the weekend, probably Sundays, where there'll be a lot of different kind of activities and experiences and bits and pieces set up, and we are doing it to generate some income. Generate some income to help make sure that the services are fully funded and covered. Because unfortunately, sadly, everyone's a bit skint at the moment, and donations across charity sector are down by about 30%. So,
really?
Yeah.
Real issue.
Yeah, worse probably in the UK, but really impacting the Isle of Man as well. So we can't rely upon. A few years ago, we used to be able to rely upon donations.
Smaller pool of people for people to donate as well, I suspect.
And lots of charities as well, not in a bad way, but just there are lots of charities. And, and it's hard, isn't it? And especially an organisation like the Children's Centre, because we work with almost every complication rather than one complication, and therefore we need to be in lots of different conversations at the same time. But there's also a version for the members of the public kind of going, well, don't they already do that? That sort of thing. So, and even though we've had a nice long talk about it, I think there's still, to really understand what it is that we do, we want people to kind of come and see the space.
And by bringing them up there, it's in their eyes sort of thing.
So that's some of the intention of having the weekend openings as well, is so people can kind of come and see how the farm works. But it's ace, and it's going to be so fun, and it's going to be lovely. And we've tested it a bit. We've done some, just sort of, some Christmas events, and exactly. But that's one of the big things for the next kind of phase of the organisation. And I hate to talk about it in business terms, but it's about us becoming self-sustainable. We've got a great relationship with some funders. We're always going to kind of put projects together for funders. We're starting to build strong relationships with schools where they do contribute to service delivery because it's appropriate. And we also do our fundraising events, which will always generate some money. But the charity is about £1 million a year. That's essentially what we need to. And every year it starts from zero. So that's the majority of the focus of my job is £1 million.
Well, when you wake up on the 1st of January, that must be a daunting year ahead every time. I would, if I woke up and someone said to me, right, this year you have to generate £1 million, I would sit there and think, where on earth do I start?
Absolutely.
But when I was there, you mentioned about people coming up from corporate firms and things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And how is that route going to help you to earn this?
Yeah, generate
this money.
Yeah,
what's the idea behind that?
Well, we do have a look because there's an amazing amount of businesses on the Isle of Man. You know, as you know, corporate service providers, CSPs, and you know, big kind of almost headquarter style organisations in Douglas.
Oh yeah, big, rich people and organisations there,
and they quite often have time for their staff to do volunteering, and you know, as a sort of a contribution to social values and things like that. We are trying to be smart around that and make sure that if they do come up to the farm to volunteer, to the centre to volunteer, that they are doing something positive and useful for us as a charity. But also making sure that they understand that, you know, volunteering isn't free, because it takes us time to do a day of volunteering.
Staff as well, eh?
Absolutely, staff and planning, and you know, it's useful to have a team of 20 people doing a bit of labour on the farm, but that has to be organised, it has to be planned, it has to be part of a development programme. And it, you know, it takes a couple of my staff team to help out on those sorts of days. So we are asking businesses to put a contribution towards any volunteering days. There's a perception that you know, they're giving it their time for free, and I absolutely understand that, and I value that. But it doesn't cost us nothing to do those days. So all we're trying to ask is for businesses to meet us in the middle. So it doesn't cost us anything, and it doesn't cost them any, you know, and they get a benefit from it.
Tick for tack. Yeah,
exactly. And to be fair, like it's language, it's called ESG, so it's environmental, social, and governance. So businesses have to report against those strands. And I've been working a little bit with some organisations in London that are kind of been doing.
Is that green sort of initiative?
Yeah, kind of a little bit. Yeah, exactly. You know, and that's one of the ways they can do it. So I know the Manx Wildlife Trust, for example, brilliant, absolutely brilliant charity, and they're doing some really good stuff around ESG work with corporate businesses. And you know, we're trying to get ourselves into that same sort of place.
Because positive spot, isn't it?
Positive, and it's a good advert for the charity. You know, if you get a group of accountants coming up to us and having a really great day. Really understanding the site and understanding the kind of work that we do, it helps give them a clear picture of what we are. You never know, they might actually have their own teenager that they are having complications with,
and that gives you to build that trust up too.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly. But you know, we're trying to make that as a dynamic financial relationship as well.
It's a wise business.
Hopefully, it's
way of doing things. You are you're a charity, but you have to run it like a business. Essentially, is that how charities are ran these days? I don't know a lot about charities. I'd like to know more. But how is this sort of fine line between running it like a charity and it's all giving to, you know, having to actually, you know, we need to make something out of this.
Absolutely.
How do you find that fine line? Is it vague?
It's. I think it's complicated, and I think there is this sort of there can be a bit of an assumption that we do everything for free because we're a charity.
Yes.
You know, and that's difficult because we, as I said, we cost £1 million a year or thereabouts to run.
I can't believe that, man.
Right? Yeah. Do you know what though? I mean, for a business that employs 25 people, we're quite cheap.
Right.
You know, and I know other entities and charities of a similar size are a lot more expensive. So we run in a very lean way.
Efficient.
Very efficient. You know, every pound that's given to the organisation, about 87 pence goes directly on service delivery, which I'm really pleased with. That's
a great stat, isn't it?
And like best practices is around about 80% and 20%. So I've getting it to that kind of 87 to 13.
Is that something you've worked hard at?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, and that's about smart thinking. And so if we're using volunteers, we're using them effectively in a smart way. And it's about smart use of resources as well. So things like converting to solar. You know, it's modelling good environmental practice, but it's also saving money for the organisation as well. You know, so we try to do as much as possible around that.
Nice.
But you're absolutely, that point about how do charities are they businesses? Not to use the word bad in an ugly way, but we are businesses. You know, we have to have income coming in to pay for the services, and we have to be aware of what the market is. You know, the Isle of Man has around about 15,000 children. Approximately 3,000 of those. I'm talking about that 20%. 3,000 of those have got some sort of a complexity,
Okay.
of which acute maybe 500, of which marginal maybe 1,000.
Yeah.
But there's still a 1,500 or so kids who have something that schools can't quite accommodate, and they're not so complex as to need full-time residential care or full-time care.
Okay.
So there's around about 1,500 or so kids on islands that could benefit from an organisation like the Children's Centre.
And what do schools do to benefit?
I mean, schools do love.
those-
I mean, schools do loads, and schools are great places, and teachers are dedicated, passionate professionals.
Mhm.
But we all know there are the kids who just don't quite fit in the four walls of a school environment.
Yeah, do you think it's different for male and female?
Ooh, that's a big question.
Not to sound controversial, but is there more young boys with these ADHD? Do you see it more at the Children's Centre? I'm not trying to be
No.
like in that way at all. It's just interesting because certainly when I was a child, I struggled to not sit still, but being out by a desk all day didn't suit me, and quite a few of the lads in my year didn't like that sort of thing. But girls seem to thrive more in that situation.
Yeah, certainly learning within schools is sort of delivered in a way that appeals to a certain percentage of brains and people. And I think typically, statistically, I think you are right. Girls outperform boys at GCSE level, and outperform boys in other kind of metrics around learning. And some of that might be because that's the way schools are set up. It might be the way the assessments are done as well. But girls have just as much percentage chance of having a neurodivergence as a boy. It's just that girls tend to mask slightly better. So particularly kind of they do autism sort of diagnosis. Girls do an awful lot of masking, and what quite often you'll have, particularly with the family environment, is that the child will seem absolutely fine within the school day, and then they'll get home and they'll have a massive emotional meltdown, a massive emotional dump on their family where they're safe. They're safe to have a big emotional dump. But the parent or parents will kind of have this crying, angry child and think that they're really struggling. And the reason they're kind of struggling in that way is because for the whole day they've, performatively been very, I'm going to say normal. I don't want to use the word normal, but they've been within the guidelines,
absolutely.
Within the
bubble.
rules. Yes, exactly. And then they get home and have this huge sort of just emotional vomit. And,
emotional vomit. That I have never heard before, Joff. I think that's going to be the quote of this episode.
I don't think it's
emotional vomit.
but it's
I get you though. Yeah, I get you.
It's so hard as a parent to kind of understand what's sort of going on there.
Do you guide parents as well then?
Yeah, no. So I didn't really talk about that, but absolutely, parenting support is a huge part of our work. Because like you think about the kind of you can do everything you possibly can to make the child content, but if you put them back into this dysregulated family environment, then all of the good work that you've done just evaporates. So we work very, very closely with parents. We do parenting courses, but one-to-one parenting support. So some parents are, we work with families as well. So we work with, the family unit, and they are clients just as much as the children are. And that's a really important part.
Actually,
it's a huge part of the service, and it's incredibly important.
It'd be scary to. I mean, say if I had a child on the way. To be honest, I don't know. I think I would. I'd certainly look for support because you don't necessarily know how to do it. I think it's one of those things that you learn on the job.
Yeah, very much.
You know yourself. You've got children.
I've got two. Yeah, I've got two girls.
Learning on the job is a big deal as a parent,
hugely.
isn't it?
And I've worked within education and children for 25, 30 years, and there's stuff that my girls come out with. It's kind of like, whoa, didn't see that one coming. And
curveball.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. And some of it's an absolute joy, and some of it's utterly terrifying. But they say about this, and there isn't a handbook or a rule book. You learn on the job and you find your own way. And partly it's because they're their own little people. They're independent, totally different human beings, and so they sometimes react to things that I'm a bit surprised by. But it's kind of like, well, that's fair enough because they're different from me. So why wouldn't they react differently?
They don't think the same.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
What does the Isle of Man and the Children's Centre mean to you now then after being here for...
That's interesting. So I've been here just 6 years. In fact, I started my job on the 1st of April 2019.
True.
So it just over the 6 years.
So how does the Isle of Man sort of... Has it got a place in your heart now, would you say?
Oh, hugely. I feel incredibly settled as a human being on the Isle of Man.
What do you think makes it special?
What do I think it makes it special? I think that's a really good question. And I'm not just going to talk about the landscape. I'm going to talk about community, actually. I have lived in most of the northern cities in the UK. I've lived in London in the UK. I lived in rural Suffolk and just on the edge of the Norfolk-Suffolk border. I've met and created really strong bonds with people here quicker than I think I've done anywhere else that I've lived or worked.
Oh, really?
And I just find the people, and it's not just the Manxies, it's the people who moved here as well.
Yes.
You know, there's something about that word community and connection, and you know, I think people are here for those sorts of reasons, and I find that really, really just evocative.
Everyone's in the same boat.
Yeah, I think so, and I think people feel they're part of the same team. You know.
Yeah.
And I don't like Facebook, and Facebook can be a bit bleak, and there are some
Yes.
Facebooks like groups that is just like, oh no, stop whinging about things. But
Negative, isn't
so
it?
neggy. But then the human beings are not like that, you know.
Yeah.
And
Tars everyone with the same brush in a sense.
makes it sound a bit like a bunch of whingers when actually I don't think people are. I think people are quite positive.
Definitely.
And want to get stuff done, you know.
Yeah.
I was at I was at a screening of a film last night. I'm going to get the title of it wrong, so apologies to the filmmakers. I think it was called Alone with Me, and it was a lovely short film that was made on the Isle of Man.
Oh, really?
And they made the comment that they said there's no such word as no in Manx, because you ask someone a question and they'll find a positive answer to it.
Oh,
And I just thought that was a beautiful articulation of it.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and I found that myself.
Yes.
It's like you can always find an answer to this
Especially
problem.
coming over from the UK.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
I mean, for myself and Herb, we've been here our whole lives. We're born here.
Yeah.
It's maybe not as prominent to see, but definitely as someone who's came into it, you can be like, oh, this is different.
And absolutely, and it really suits me. I love helping people, you know, and you know, hence doing the jobs I kind of do. But it's a helpful community as well. You know, people are always looking out for each other, and I just love that. I think it's wonderful.
I could speak about that all day, Joff.
Yeah.
And that sort of leads me nicely on to our final sort of wrapping the episode up, and we always ask the same question at the end of each episode.
Cool.
Purely because we like to throw ideas out there into the mixer, and I think with ideas, change and sort of progress is increased. And so the question is, if you could change or alter one thing about the Isle of Man, what would it be and why?
One thing.
One thing. Just take a second. I'll have a drink.
Yeah.
We ask everyone. Help yourself. We ask everyone the same question. Just so. Yeah, I think that ideas and do you think ideas too are an essential part of sort of pushing things forward?
Absolutely, that. Yeah. It's a really super question, and it's a really big question, and you know, I think it'd be too simplistic to say something like, you know, more money for more services. You know, I'm going to try and say this without coming across as being critical. I think sometimes one observation is that the Isle of Man tries to solve every single problem separately.
Okay.
So, and I think sometimes you can solve problems collectively. And I'll give controversially, and I'm probably going to get into trouble for this.
No, wonderful. Controversy is great.
And I might get into trouble. I understand, and I think it's amazing. But they're making there's a group called the Isle of Man Cancer Charities.
Okay.
And they're making a special place for people and families who've been horribly impacted by cancer, and it's an awful disease. You know, my mum's had it. One of my best friends has been through it in a really, you know, really complex way, and I see the impact it has on families, and it's an awful disease. However, you know, is creating an entirely separate space only and purely for families impacted by cancer the right solution for a small island population where we've got around about 86,000? You know, could we not talk about it in terms of people who've been impacted by all sorts of life-changing diseases?
Yes.
You know, and I think that sometimes it's a small version of it, and I'm not talking disrespectfully, because I really absolutely respect what they're doing as an organisation. But we've got a super hospice organisation. With phenomenal team there as well. And it's like maybe there's a way of kind of putting those two things together that would make a little bit more sense. So it's not that's not my one thing to change. My one thing to change is sometimes we don't need to make every problem in isolation. I think we can look at things a bit more collectively, and it's about systems thinking. It's all part of the same problem. So I'll use the language of schools. If we don't have great, brilliant, world-class schools, we're not going to attract people to come across to the businesses that they want to bring to the Isle of Man, because if they're looking at making their own family or have a family, they want the schools here to be super. So that's another reason to come and live on the Isle of Man, or be from the Isle of Man. If you're a person who's born and raised here. So schools aren't separate from businesses, and businesses aren't separate from community, and community's not separate from the environment. It's all kind of part of the same thing.
Yeah, like a huge collective.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's hard to, you're saying what one thing I would change, but I think the one thing I'd like to change is for people to be able to see sometimes a slightly bigger picture and understand the context of everything. Wonderful. And therefore we don't need to solve every problem individually. We can sometimes solve problems together.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Joff. That is an in-depth, controversial answer to that question, but I think it's a good one.
I hope so.
Yeah, don't worry. I think it'll be fine. Thank you very much, Joff Whitten.
You're very welcome.
You are definitely doing a great job.
Thank you.
And I commend the work that you do. So thank you for coming, and it's been a pleasure. Just shout out, is it Children's Centre on Facebook, and is that where you guys people can keep up the track to you guys?
Loads of ways to get through to us, and if you are a parent and some of what I've said has resonated, and you really want to give us a call to talk about your own family or your own situation, the phone number's dead easy. It's 800000. Children's Centre on Facebook, absolutely. Perfect. And the website's thechildrencentre.org.im. So it should be reasonably easy to find, I hope.
Get in there. Yep, that is a great way to finish. Thank you very much, Joff. It's been an absolute pleasure.
No, thank you for having me.